Hello, everybody, and welcome to LocalEyes 5 and 5, a web series where we're going to go through stories, anecdotes, and personal experience about the localization industry. I'm extremely honored to have such a great guest for the very first episode ever, probably one of the most influential personalities in the localization industry. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Lori Thicke.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you, Dario. I'm really pleased to be here and be on the very first one. And I've seen some of the other work you're doing, so I think it'll be an exciting series.
Thank you. Thank you. Just to start with, for the very few that might not know much about Lori's background, here's a brief recap. Founder of Lexcelera, founder of Lexworks, founder of Translators Without Borders, a huge number of publications and a crazy number of presentations around the world about the localization industry and our activity with Translators Without Borders. Did I miss anything?
No, thank you very much.
That's pretty much it. So that would be enough for me just to close this interview because we said pretty much everything.
I think so, yeah.
But yeah, no, just before we get started with the actual questions, since this is the first episode, I want to go through the format and how it works. So LocalEyes 5 and 5 is about 5 questions in 5 minutes. These 5 minutes are basically the time that Lori has for the 5 answers. So it's combined for everything. But where's the challenge? The challenge is that I get to keep the time. So Lori won't be saying the time passing by. I'm the only one with the timer right now. And the timer starts when, Lori, the timer starts when you start answering the first question, and it stops when the answer is complete, and it will resume again for the second question and so on.
Okay, 5 minutes total.
5 minutes total. It's crazy.
Okay, got it.
It's a bit challenging because you have, like, you could talk about localization for hours and hours, but you have to do it like five questions in 5 minutes is extremely unfair. I recognize that.
I am super passionate, and yeah, it might be a little bit hard to keep myself down, but I'm going to try to keep myself down too.
Let's see what.
To 5.
Okay, so if you agree, let's get started with the first question.
Okay.
All right. So the first 2 questions are actually the same for all speakers. The first question is probably the one we can all relate to because we've all been there at one stage during our career. How would you describe the translation and localization industry to someone who has absolutely no clue, who's never worked in the industry? And how would you convince them that languages matter? If you're ready, I'll start the timer.
Now, okay.
Now, there we go.
Okay, I would say that it is the most important thing in the world. Translation is the most important thing in the world you've never really thought about. It is so off the radar, yet it's the most basic thing that we do. We communicate in our language. And certainly with companies, it's really a question of life or death selling their products because language is so close to us, because it speaks to our heart. So it doesn't only inform us. And, you know, with the reports that just have come out lately from the Common Sense Advisory, can't read, won't buy. That's a no-brainer. But there's also this question of not only people understanding the information, but it touching them in their hearts. Because people tend to speak one language, it's so not on their radar. That's why I say translation is the most important thing you never really thought about.
I think that's a great answer. I think that's a great answer. If anyone was convinced otherwise, I think you gave them something to think about. Great job also, because you're basically on track. You only spent a minute on the first question, so it's well done, very well done. No pressure.
Okay, no pressure. Yeah, no pressure. I'm kind of trying to pace myself too. So.
Well, you're doing a great job. Absolutely great job right now. I'll keep you.
Okay.
So The second question is slightly more personal, but I think it's quite important to the format, and one of my favorite, I'd say, because we all have different stories. We all come from different backgrounds. So the question really is, how did you get started in the localization industry? Some have studied, some just happened to be here, some changed industry through the years. What's your story? And the timer starts now.
Okay, I came to the industry by my love of language, but it was my love of English. I didn't know anything about translation, but I had finished my master's in creative writing, came to Paris, France to write the great Canadian novel. Soon started to need money. And since I had started businesses in my younger days, I ended up editing translations, very quickly turned into a company. This is back when people had been working on typewriters and they were just moving to computers. So the idea of editing a translation to change it and make it better was completely unknown. I mean, if you made a mistake on page 3 and you're typing it, just let it go. So I came into it one of the new voices for editing translation. I started my company in 1986. It was originally called Eurotext. It's now called Lexcelera because Eurotext was sort of Eurocentric. And that's how I entered the industry. Backdoor.
Well, that's great. Another great display of timing. Another minute passed by.
Oh my God.
Slightly over, but very well done. And I would agree with you. Most of us have started in the industry maybe for 2 reasons: passion and money. That's always the
Yeah. There's a lot more of one in our industry though than the other. There's a lot more passion than money to be made.
Yes, yeah, that definitely. I agree with that too. 100%. So moving on to the third question, I wanted to move a bit more into your activity with Translators Without Borders. That's an extremely interesting topic, definitely for me, hopefully for everyone who will be watching this interview. My question really is about the challenges through the years, because you've been active for 27 years now, if I'm not wrong. And you've been actively trying to help through the many humanitarian crises that happened in this 27 years. And you've been doing something that it's, in my head, that it's extremely hard to do, trying to break language barriers. It's not an easy thing to do. So what's the biggest challenge that you faced in this 27 years? Timer starts now.
The biggest challenge is related to the first thing I said, that translation is the most important thing that you never really thought about. I started Translators Without Borders to offer free translations to humanitarian groups to make their work, so their work could go further, so they could do more. And a tremendous group of people around that let that carry on for years and years. And then the earthquake in Haiti happened. And a new realization came to me, and that made me realize what the biggest challenge we were against, which is helping nonprofits to understand the importance of language when they reach people. And it's not enough to feed information to people who need it in a crisis situation in your language. It's simply not working. People need it in their language. That even today, it's hard to convince nonprofits who maybe hire the local elite who speak English or French or whatever global language is, and don't get that the people who are the most vulnerable, the people who need the most help, tend not to speak a European language, and those are the people we need to speak to. Those are the people we need to help access information, the kind of things that we can access, that we can find out so easily. If it's not in their language, it's just like a door closing.
Yeah, it's a novel thing. It's great. And that kind of takes me to the fourth question. The next question is kind of related to this, probably a bit more around what's happening right now. So we are facing a pandemic. Never in my life I would have thought we were going to go through this. But Translators Without Borders is doing a lot, is trying to help a lot through the crisis. One of the examples that I have in my mind is the creation of a glossary related to COVID-19 to try to help during this emergency. I think one of the main points here is that, of course, there's no room for error when it comes to medical translation, but there's also a very large impact that random communication can have, spreading fear, spreading misinformation. So it's extremely important just to make sure that every message is conveyed with using the right language. So can you tell us how this glossary is helping, and why is it needed? The timer starts now.
Well, Dario, if you think about it, we don't have a cure, we don't have a vaccine. So the only way right now today that we can fight this pandemic is with information. So if that information isn't understandable, you've just cut off one of the arms to help people, and you simply can't help them. It's so important that people understand the message, and again, that it's delivered in their language, because if a message is delivered in another language, it can be very political. They can understand only parts of it and not the really important parts. It can seem like, oh yeah, that's a conspiracy, because if it was true, it would come to us in our language, so why should we listen? This is our only tool that we have to fight, is information. And so that information needs to be in the language people understand. The glossary brings out some interesting problems also with local languages. So we're talking about the people who are most vulnerable. So for example, in Swahili, there's no word for social distancing. I mean, you know, English is a language that takes on new words from other cultures very easily, but not every language does that. So the glossary, for example, TWB had to invent a word for social distancing. In Swahili, the explanation is stay away from each other. Okay. And also, it requires a huge sensitivity to understand how people are talking to each other, how people are understanding the pandemic. With Rohingya in the camps, there's no point in talking to them about COVID-19, for example. That's not how they talk about this pandemic. So the glossary instructs the NGOs, the non-governmental organizations, the nonprofits, to use coronavirus rather than COVID or COVID-19, so that people will understand the message. It was the same thing with Ebola, where people in the West would say, but why don't they understand? And when you saw how the messages were delivered, they were delivered in our language. So again, if you are speaking a European language, you're not that vulnerable. You're not the ones who need the most protection. And right now, information is how we can protect people. Absolutely. It needs to be in their language, not in ours.
Yeah, it's a great point. It's absolutely a great point. Thanks for that answer. It's just great. Nothing to add there. I didn't stop you because it's just too important, and you know, it's too good to hear from you. We went over the 5 minutes already. That's absolutely fine.
Oh shoot! I thought it was so good too. Okay.
No, it's great. So first episode, we are already going against the name of the format, but that's absolutely fine. No worries at all. But this is too interesting and too important, so it's fine. I'll move on to the last.
Thank you.
Which is not really a question. It's more of a moment to raise awareness to freelancers, individuals, or company about how they can help Translators Without Borders right now. So this is a moment for you just to address to the audience that is following us right now and say, this is what we need right now. Please do this. There's no timer. Sorry.
Okay. Well, I feel like Translators Without Borders is both the humanitarian arm of the industry and the voice of the industry. So I feel like the advocacy for language is important. There needs to be a really loud voice making that case for advocacy. Also, we are the charity of the language industry. The translators are just the most incredible. You yourself have offered to volunteer. So there's so many volunteers right now. There's something like 35,000 volunteers from the language community who are offering their help to Translators Without Borders. What that means is the biggest need left today, and it is a big need, is simply funding. A lot of translation company, at one time, LocalEyes was a platinum sponsor, one of our largest sponsors. And so that kind of sponsorship on behalf of translation companies is really, really important.
That's great.
So I can't say that enough, how helpful that would be.
Yeah, I think it's clear enough. So I'm sure that everybody listening would probably, I definitely agree, and pretty much everybody would agree. It's a great cause. It's definitely a great cause. And if you needed anything to convince yourself about how great this cause is, I'm sure that whatever Lori said during this interview definitely clarified everything. It's a great cause. It's a noble cause. It's well taught. So congratulations for that. That was really the last question.
Thank you.
It was extremely interesting. It was, again, I was honored to talk to you. It was definitely interesting for me. I'll be watching this over and over. So is there anything else you would like to say before closing this interview, Lori?
I just want to thank you for this initiative. Really, you've been behind us in other ways before in the past, and this is another great initiative. So, and thank you to LocalEyes too.
I'll make sure the message is spread within the company. That's for sure. They'll be watching this, so hopefully. So, all right, Lori. Thanks very much. For you guys out there, stay tuned for the next episode of LocalEyes 5 and 5. Thanks, Lori. Goodbye.
Thanks, Daria. Have a good day. Bye-bye.